we're going to go into how scientists do modern day classification, a little bit of history on how we got here also. Linnaeus classified things as either animals or plants. I think I mentioned that during class. Animals could move, used food for energy. Plants generally did not move, energy from the sun. As more discoveries were made, knew there was a little bit more to that story. So here's the story of how the different kingdoms came to be. In the 1700s, plants and animals, right here. Then we had microorganisms that were discovered when microscopes started being used, and those microorganisms were called protists, protista. Yeast, molds, and mushrooms were put in their own kingdom called fungi. And then when scientists discovered that there were some microorganisms that lacked nuclei, mitochondria, and chloroplasts, all those organelles, prokaryotes were put into a new kingdom, Monera. Single-celled eukaryotes remained in the protista kingdom. So that's the 5-kingdom system. This is what I learned when I was in high school, not in the 1950s, in the 1980s. In the 1990s, researchers started looking at the Monerans, the prokaryotes, and discovered that there were 2 pretty different groups. So 2 different kingdoms, eubacteria and archaebacteria, and that's what we have today, the 6-kingdom system. Genetic analysis has shown that the 2 prokaryotic kingdoms are more different from each other and from eukaryotes than they thought. So there's a new category, a broader one called the domain, a more inclusive category than a kingdom. So there are 3 domains: domain bacteria, and that should say kingdom eubacteria, not domain. Domain archaea, corresponding to kingdom archaebacteria, and domain eukarya, which are all the rest of the kingdoms. We're putting protista in quotes because it truly is like a miscellaneous category. Here's a great schematic of what the 3 domains look like, the kingdoms that are contained within each, and then the highlights of the characteristics of all of those. It's a great table. Use it. Evolutionary classification is rapidly changing. Scientists are trying to put life on a single evolutionary tree, so finding that initial organism, that initial life form from which all other organisms have branched off. Again, I'm emphasizing these are current hypotheses about the evolutionary relationships. This is what scientists think right now. And just pointing to the fact that this is not how I learned it like 20 years ago, this is a hypothesis. It's probably going to change again. What I'm teaching you is not what I learned 20 years ago. So we have domain bacteria over here on the left, domain archaea, and domain eukarya. Sort of interesting to point out, domain archaea, these are the bacteria that live in extreme environments, extreme heat, extreme cold, high salt content, no oxygen. They're actually, based on evolutionary relationships, more closely related to eukaryotes, that include us, than the bacteria that live inside us under what we would call normal circumstances, normal conditions. So let's talk about domain bacteria. That's the far left, the most distantly related to us. Domain bacteria, unicellular, prokaryotic. This is kingdom eubacteria. There it's written correct. The hallmark of this domain and kingdom is the cell wall is made with a substance called peptidoglycan. We have very, very diverse species here. So free-living soil organisms all the way to deadly parasites. Some do photosynthesis, others do not. Some need oxygen. Others are actually killed by oxygen. Domain Archaea, the bacteria that are more closely related to us, kingdom Archaebacteria. Unicellular and prokaryotic again. And like I said, they're called extremophiles. Extreme environments. High temperature, high salt, no oxygen. Many of these bacteria, again, could be killed by oxygen. They do not have peptidoglycan in their cell walls, and their cell membranes have lipids that aren't found in any other organism. Domain Eukarya are all of the eukaryotes. They have a nucleus. The 4 remaining kingdoms are here, again Protista in quotations. We'll get to that in a sec. Protists, like I think I even said, a catch-all group of eukaryotes, miscellaneous category. These don't form a single clade. There's at least 5 clades in kingdom Protista. So since these organisms can't be properly placed into a single taxon, we refer to them as protists. Most are unicellular, some are multicellular, some are photosynthetic, others are heterotrophic, and they differ depending on the organism. They have characteristics that resemble fungi, plants, or animals. Let's take a look at fungi. Heterotrophs, so they get their food from outside sources. These cell walls contain chitin, so compare that with the cell wall composition of plants and bacteria. Fungi, most of them are decomposers. They break things down, feed on dead or decaying organic matter. Mushrooms are an example, multicellular. Yeasts are unicellular. Then the plants, multicellular, they have cell walls that contain cellulose, and they make their own food. They're autotrophic. Specifically, they use the process called photosynthesis. They can't move. The entire plant kingdom is the sister group to the red algae, which are protists. So we have green algae, mosses, ferns, cone-bearing plants, and flowering plants. Finally, Animalia. Multicellular, heterotrophic, they do not have cell walls, and most can move. Incredible diversity here.